Every chord I strummed was a desperate attempt to drown out the silence that screamed louder than words. She walked out of my life, leaving behind only echoes of what could have been. But I see through the lies now. Every smile, every promise was just another mask. I won't let them haunt me any longer. This time it's all or nothing. I woke up around 10:30. The first thing I needed to do? Call Teddy Cooper. A young person answered, but Teddy came on the line quickly. "Hey, Mark," he said. "Morning. Ferlin told me to call you. About those two you played last night. They're yours." "You saw them?" He laughed. "Of course." "Was it that clear?" "Sorta." "Okay," I said, my voice getting slower. "What's up with them? How many more do you have?" "A couple dozen." "Think I could see them?" "You're joking, right?" "Nope. Me and Nick both would like to check them out." "Why?" He paused, then said, "They're not completely done. The two you played, anyway. They need a little work. But I think there's something special about them." I felt both proud and a bit let down. I thought they were finished for a long time. Then again, I never really thought they were that great either. "The thing is," Teddy went on, "I think me or Nick or both of us could help you finish them." I was surprised. Teddy and maybe Nick would help me finish my songs, then perform them. "You still there?" "I'm here," I said. "So you think of recording them?" "Not likely. It's not really our style. But we know some people who might want to. We have an agent who's interested in meeting you too." "So what do you get out of it?" "Royalties," he said, a bit surprised by my question. "If we help, we get a share." I thought about it. "That sounds fair." "It won't be 50-50, he continued. "You've done most of the work." "So how would that work?" "Not sure. We'll figure it out together. Percentages for each song depending on how much work I or Nick do on them." I thought about his offer for a moment. I could either say no and they might never be heard, or say yes and maybe find success. "When do you want to meet?" I asked. "What?" "When do you want to meet?" I repeated. "I'll contact Nick, then get back to you later this week, okay?" "Sounds good to me." After I hung up, I stared at the phone for 5 minutes. The possibilities were exciting. I could change my career and maybe make my mark. I could picture crowds cheering, everyone coming to see Mark Roberts perform. But then that feeling faded, and I grabbed my keys to go grocery shopping before the football game. I stood at the deli counter waiting for my potato salad, coleslaw, and cheese to be wrapped and tagged. "I thought you were a churchgoer," a voice said behind me. I turned and saw Rebecca Galarza. "Hello," I nodded, giving her a friendly smile before turning back to my groceries. Before I could push away, Rebecca bumped her cart into mine. "You were really good last night," she said, beaming. "Really nice." "Thanks. Is that what you did in Memphis? When you weren't busy helping people and being a great young lawyer, you were also a well-known country singer?" "No, I haven't done that in a long time. Not in front of a crowd, anyway." "Is that why you came up here to Grant City? Because it's a place for musicians, and you want to leave the law behind and make it big in music?" Her playful eyes and teasing tone showed she was enjoying this. It made me smile. I looked at her in her comfy faded jeans and t-shirt and couldn't help but feel cheerful. "Are you checking me out, Mr. Southern Gentleman?" I laughed. "Sorry, but you make anything look good." "Really?" "Definitely. You're quite smooth. I do my best." "You succeed," she said with a raised eyebrow and a teasing look. "When you remember to. Do you have any plans for today?" I paused, then said, "Sorry, but I need to go somewhere important." A look of disappointment crossed her face, but then brightened up again. "Maybe another time?" I wasn't sure. She'd come by maybe 6 times since I started at the hitching rail, always having just 2 drinks, a gin and tonic with lime, before leaving. I had only talked to her a little, but I'd seen her around with the other folks. She was pretty but kind and not full of herself like some people can be. Instead, she was mostly cheerful and playful. She smiled a lot, rarely looked upset, and seemed comfortable being herself. "Listen," I said, placing my hand on her cart. "I really need to see someone today. It's important to me." "That's fine." She smiled, her cheerful mood returning. I glanced at my shopping cart, then back to her. "Still," I began, searching for the right words, "what I'm doing today won't take too long. After that, I just need to prepare some meals for the week, which shouldn't take too many hours. Are you asking me to dinner? She teased. I tensed a little, and she quickly added, because if you are, the answer is yes. Just tell me the time and place, and I'll be there. I don't really know where to go around here. I don't want to go to the rail on my day off, and my place isn't really ready for guests. Still getting settled? It came furnished. Just not the best, I guess. So it's really a genuine bachelor pad? Like from college? Yep. I haven't seen one of those in forever, she said, rubbing her hands together. Please, let me invite myself over for dinner? My doubt faded at her excitement. Her energy felt like an adventure. I'll make dinner, I said. And I'll bring the drinks, she replied. Wine, beer, or something else? Your choice. I don't really drink much. That's okay. She glanced at my shopping cart. What's for dinner? Sandwiches, I replied. I really like sandwiches. Sandwiches, she echoed, smiling. Sounds perfect. Give me your address and I'll come over. I gave it to her, and with a cheerful wave, she went back to shopping, humming to herself. Clarice Talbot sat alone at the edge of the bleachers. The other parents, who had known each other for years, chatted easily, paying little attention to her. She had only moved to Grant City 7 months ago with her son, Skylar. Her simple clothes and tired look didn't invite conversation, so she jumped a little when I sat beside her and asked, Mind if I join you? She shuffled over and nodded. I've noticed you've been on your own a lot, I said, smiling and using a friendly tone. Kind of like me. She tried to smile, but it looked a bit tense. Are you new here too? About a month, I answered. I relaxed and looked at the field, spotting Skylar right away. He was a halfback, small for his position and weighed down by his gear, just like most of the other boys. That's your boy, right? I asked, pointing. The one with the ball? Skylar, she replied, her eyes following him as he ran and got tackled but still managed to move forward a bit. I thought so, I said. You seem a bit nervous when he has the ball. She turned her gaze to the game, looking focused. So I wasn't imagining things? You've been watching me? Not like that, I said with a chuckle. But it's hard not to notice. We're the only ones sitting alone, so we stand out. She laughed lightly. Tell me about it. I'm Mark, I said, offering my hand. Clarice, she replied, shaking my hand briefly. How long have you been here, Clarice? Just a couple of months. Me too. So we're both new around here, she said. Looks like it, I agreed. Where did you move from, Mark? Memphis. How about you? Washington, D.C., do you work in government? I did. And now? She smiled. I'm finishing my degree at Chadwick. And you? I work at the hitching rail. She looked at me, surprised that I was a bartender. And Skylar? I asked, wanting to keep the conversation going for a while. How old is he? Almost 8. I nodded and looked back at the field. We watched the game quietly for almost an hour. Then, with just a few minutes left in the fourth quarter, the visiting team started to make a push. They were down by 4 points, but still had a chance to win against the Grant City Generals. The parents were getting anxious. To make things even more dramatic, a light rain began to fall, adding to the chill of the day. With just over a minute left, the other quarterback prepared to throw. Little Skylar, playing safety, somehow positioned himself to intercept the ball from the player who was trying to catch it. He then sprinted down the field. Suddenly, I felt a grip on my arm. It was Clarice, her eyes glued on her son as he raced toward the end zone. The other parents cheered, and I smiled, watching as Skylar was stopped just past midfield with 1 minute remaining in the game. His team erupted in celebration, the crowd was loud, and I stood to cheer him on. Clarice, however, looked oddly relieved that he stood up after the play. He's okay, I said. She glanced at me and then at her hand still on my arm. Looking down, she said, Sorry, I just worry sometimes. He made a big play, I told her. Or at least helped save the game. Yeah, that's good. He'll make more friends because of this, right? Definitely. Good, she said, then pulled her hand back and avoided my gaze. She turned back to the game, and I used that moment to step away from the bleachers. I had picked up what I needed to understand. Clarice and her son were dealing with their struggles alone, and her worries about him were clear. The smell hit her as soon as I opened the door, and her expression showed she was intrigued. "I thought you were making sandwiches?" I smiled. "Tortas," I said, adding a slight Spanish touch. "You know, Mexican sandwiches." "I know what those are," she replied, coming into the apartment. "I just didn't expect. I thought it would be something more standard." "Boring." I took the bag from her hand, looked inside, and put the drink into the fridge. "I thought that choice was safe since you said you don't drink much," Rebecca called from the entryway as she studied the simple space. Actually, simple was putting it lightly. There was an old couch and coffee table, likely several years past their prime, and a small TV with a DVD player. In the corner, my guitar sat on a stand beside a music stand. The dining area had a small table with 2 chairs, nothing more. There were no decorations, just a clock on the microwave. "You've really lived here a month?" "Yep." "And this is it? Home sweet home." "But where is your furniture? Even college dorm rooms had some decorations." "Don't tell me it's just a simple room." I laughed and walked down the hallway, motioning for her to come along. "It's not fancy," I said as I opened the door. She peeked inside and stopped. In the corner, there was a neatly made bed on the floor with sheets and pillows. An alarm clock and a stack of books sat beside it. The closet door was partly open, showing several white shirts and a few pairs of blue jeans hanging inside, with some socks and undergarments neatly folded on a shelf above. 3 pairs of shoes stood in a line on the closet floor, brown loafers and 2 pairs of white sneakers. "What do you do when you're not working?" I closed the door and replied, "I eat, sleep, and play guitar." "Really?" she said, playfully poking me. "Sounds like you need to eat more and play guitar less." "I guess you're right," I said, heading back to the kitchen. I walked over to the small pots on the stove and gave them a little stir. One was simmering with meat. The other had onions cooking in butter. "It smells great," she said. "I'm trying my own version of a Mexican-style sandwich with caramelized onions and cheese." She took in the smells of beef, garlic, herbs, and a hint of wine, then breathed in the scent of the buttery onions. "Are you a chef or something?" I tapped a cookbook open on the counter. "Just a book about gourmet sandwiches, you know, from the cooking shows." "So you really like sandwiches?" I grinned and opened the freezer, which was full of labeled containers with different sandwich fillings. "I make some fillings every Sunday and freeze them. I pick up bread and cheese during the week, and that's it." "And that's all?" "I usually have a soup with it, like vegetable or tomato. Sometimes a salad, one of those pre-made bags." She laughed. Classic bachelor. I smiled and asked, "Have you ever heard of Warren Zevon?" She shook her head, looking a bit confused. "He was a singer and a songwriter, one of my favorites. About 10 years ago, he was told he had cancer. When they announced it, they said he might have 6 months to live. He had smoked for many years, and was known for other struggles too, I thought. They asked him what he would miss the most, and you know what he said?" She shook her head. "Sandwiches." He said, "I really like sandwiches." After he passed, they made a tribute album of his songs with other artists, and they called it Enjoy Every Sandwich. It made me think. I really like sandwiches, too. "Still," Rebecca said, "every meal?" "What can I say?" I said with a smile and a shrug. He had a point. I really enjoy my food, and I don't want to look back later and wish I had tried more things. "You should definitely eat more," she said, poking me gently. "You really think I'm too thin?" I asked as I opened a bag of fresh rolls, slicing them and placing them on a plate. It wasn't shocking to me. Guys sometimes got complimented for looking a certain way. I always felt like I looked more like someone who worked at a desk. "I'm just kidding," she said, as if she could tell what I was thinking. I searched through the fridge, pulling out 2 bottles of soda and some potato salad. "Does it make me, I don't know, not very attractive? I mean, should I be doing something about it?" I gave her a hopeful look as I opened the bottles and handed her one. "I was just," she started to say. "No, I really want to know. Should I start exercising? Do you think that would help?" I took a drink and she sipped hers while she thought about how to respond. "Turn around," Rebecca finally said. I looked at her first, then turned my back while I added some meat and onions to the rolls and sprinkled on some cheese. "Well?" I asked as I opened the potato salad and served some onto each plate. "Can I turn back now?" I felt her hand on my shoulder, reassuring me as she leaned in closer. Maybe I was being a bit too picky. Maybe, I said. Probably, she said with a smile. I turned to face her, feeling happy. Just let me know when you're sure about it, okay? She raised an eyebrow and gazed at me for a moment. Without warning, she stepped a bit closer, and we shared a quiet moment together. After a moment, Rebecca took a deep breath and spoke softly. Come on, she said, taking my hand with a warm smile. Let's go. She led me toward the bedroom, and I followed, feeling both excited and unsure. Once there, she faced me, looking playful yet gentle. Just tell me if I'm getting too close for comfort, she said with a teasing grin. I stood there not knowing what to say, as her smile seemed to say a lot. She seemed confident, but also gentle. Do you trust me? She whispered, taking a small step closer. I nodded, feeling a bond between us that was both warm and thrilling. Let's take our time, she said softly, reaching out to touch my hand. After a brief pause, she smiled to reassure me. As we stood there, close but still giving each other space, the air was filled with a sense of understanding that needed no words. It was a special moment, one where we didn't need to speak. Just being together felt perfect. Mark, you're wonderful. I paused and looked at her, unsure if she was serious or just playing around, but when she stepped closer, her look was full of admiration, and I understood. This is, she said softly, her voice filled with warmth. She reached out and took my hand, gazing up at me with eyes that shared a lot of feelings. The bond between us was clear, and everything felt important, as if time had slowed just for us. You don't know how much this means, she said in a gentle whisper, lightly touching my arm. Her honesty moved me, and I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. So, does this mean we're definitely on the same page? I asked, brushing my fingers lightly on her shoulder. She met my gaze, her eyes sparkling with hope. There was a message between us, one that words couldn't capture. As she moved a bit closer, our connection grew deeper, and we both knew this moment was special for more than just what might happen next. It was about the trust we felt. She smiled softly, still holding my hand, and the quiet between us was filled with mutual understanding. There was no rush, no need to fill the air with chatter. Just being together was enough. She moved in a bit, her eyes locked on mine, showing a strong connection. I placed my hands on her back, feeling a comforting warmth, and we enjoyed a moment that spoke loudly without saying anything. After a while, she leaned in, her face close to mine. Our breaths mingled as she gave me a gentle kiss, each one soft and kind. I held her close, feeling our bond grow stronger with each moment. Her breathing quickened, and I could feel the energy between us building. My hands stayed at her back, keeping her close as we shared this meaningful moment. Just a little more, she whispered, her voice full of feeling as she leaned closer, slightly trembling from the connection we were experiencing. I held her gently, steadying her as we felt a sense of closeness that was beyond words. She leaned back slightly, keeping her hands on mine, and quietly said, "You're truly amazing." I smiled, filled with happiness and a sense of connection, leaning my head back for a moment to treasure what we had shared. Really? Absolutely. Feeling encouraged by the sincerity on her face, I wrapped my arms around her in a warm hug. It felt nice, the soft fabric of her shirt against my hands, as we shared a quiet, comfortable moment. This is perfect, she said softly. What? I asked, enjoying the cozy feeling of being next to her. You really like to cuddle, she said with a playful nudge. Not everyone is into sharing close moments like this after everything. I didn't reply. I just wanted to savor this warmth a little longer. 15 minutes later, we were at my small dining table having dinner, both dressed casually in comfortable clothes. This is really good, she said after taking a big bite of her sandwich. It tastes better when it's warm, I replied. You're right. I think I'll have more sandwiches from now on. I smiled and took a bite, keeping my eyes on her. What? She finally asked. About earlier? What was that all about? She shrugged. You seemed like you could use some comfort. I wanted a bit of a break, too. I thought about this. After a moment, Rebecca asked, Was it okay for you? That's an understatement, I replied. I hope I wasn't too much, she said, a bit unsure. No way. Feel free to take the lead any time. And what about how I look? You think I'm pretty much perfect, I said, smiling as I remembered the moment and how close we were. Pretty much, she joked, recalling what we talked about before. I didn't get a really good look. It all happened too quickly for that. Like what? She raised her eyebrow with a smile. You know, small details. She laughed. Small details? Among other things. She shook her head and giggled, and I smiled back. We finished our meal in a pleasant silence. After we were done, I took the plates, cleaned everything up, and grabbed us both drinks from the fridge. Why me? I asked. Because you're cute? I raised my eyebrow, hoping for more. You're like a puzzle, she said with a sip of her drink. You're cute but quiet. It's clear you just went through a tough time, and you seem a bit unsure of yourself. I saw an opportunity to distract myself and to let you know that there's no need to feel insecure. I thought for a moment and nodded. So, more like a nice gesture? Her eyes narrowed a bit, unsure if I was joking. Your confidence took me by surprise. Once I noticed that, plus you're really good at talking, I became interested. So it wasn't just a nice gesture. She seemed genuine, not just trying to make me feel better or boost my confidence. Seriously. A woman was serious with me for a change, and I couldn't help but think about how long it had been since Sandy had really connected with me instead of just going through the motions. Then another thought hit me. Sandy. I'm still married. I let my head drop to the table, staring at the beer label in front of me. In a quiet voice, I said, I'm not divorced yet. I noticed her tension across the table. But you said, at the bar, you're not wearing a ring, and when everyone asked if I was divorced, I said something like that. But according to the state of Tennessee, I'm still married. I ran away, and that part was true, but we haven't even started the divorce process. Her face changed from confusion to understanding, then settled on disappointment. So what's really going on? Rebecca asked, her voice filled with concern. I took a deep breath and looked at the wall over Rebecca's shoulder. Speaking flatly and calmly, I tried to share this for the first time without too much emotion. Sandy, that's her name. I've liked her for a long time, at least since middle school. But she was always into my brother. They dated the whole time, and I was just on the sidelines. She was kind to me, but her heart was really set on Stevie, my brother. I let out a small laugh. Honestly, she probably didn't even notice me much. So why didn't she marry him? Rebecca asked. He passed away. A little over 8 years ago, he died in a car accident. I looked at her and noticed the serious look on her face as she leaned in with her arms on the table. So they tried to bring us together, I continued, focusing back on the wall. A year and a half later, our parents decided Sandy and I would be a good match. Encouraged or forced? They really set it all up. You mean they arranged everything? Rebecca said, leaning back in surprise. Why would they do that? Votes, I replied. Sandy's dad was running for office, and it looked good politically. But your parents, why would they agree to that? Pretty much the same reason, I guess. It was also a big favor to the governor. He would owe my dad and Sandy's dad. And you knew this and went along with it? I held her gaze. I found out the weekend before I left. She still looked unsure. You never had a clue before that? Not like this. It's hard to believe someone would do that to their own son. Without telling him? How did you find out? I just did, okay? So you're sure it's true? Definitely. You didn't get it wrong? I heard a conversation I shouldn't have. Our parents were talking about it openly. And you're certain you didn't misunderstand? Rebecca, I said, I'm a lawyer too. Please trust me to know the situation. Sorry, she murmured. It's just so strange. I mean, an arranged marriage? I shook my head. Only partly arranged. She agreed to it, knowing the situation. They gave me the chance to follow my long-held dream, and I fell for the entire plan. Did she know you were in the dark? I smiled. Good question. That's the important part. Rebecca tilted her head. So you don't really know? I shook my head. And I'm still trying to figure out why that matters. She thought about it for a moment and said, there's a big difference. If she knew and you didn't, she may have taken advantage of you. I shrugged. In the end, it still wasn't a true marriage to her. But it was true for you, right? Yes, until I found out the truth. She leaned back, deep in thought. So, Do you see my point? I asked. It's not just that I'm divorced. It feels more like I never really had a marriage. But you cared for her. She didn't feel the same. To her, I was just a friend for a few years. Are you sure that's it? I shrugged. I'm not completely sure. It could be more complicated, but I don't think it changes much. How so? Some things she said, I thought it was her way of joking. Now I see those comments differently. So after you overheard that talk, you just left? No, I said, looking at a spot on the wall. It took me 2 days. Tell me more, she urged. Something must have happened in those 2 days. Did you find out something else? No, but I suspect there might have been other relationships during our time together. I'm not sure about the details or how many there were. Then what was it? My dad, I said, leaning forward and placing my hands on the table. She hesitated for a moment before covering mine with hers. I learned that I have a brother, or at least, there's a young boy my dad's campaign team is supporting while keeping it quiet. Her eyes widened. I nodded. Yes, he's right here in Grant City. His name's Skylar, and he looks a lot like me when I was younger. And his mother? She used to work for my dad. I'm here to help you find a solution that works for everyone, she said, lightly tapping her fingers on the table as she considered the situation. So you came here to find him? She asked. I nodded. What do you plan to do? Not sure yet, I confessed. She leaned back, lost in thought as she considered the impact of my search. I don't want to disrupt this boy's life. He doesn't deserve to be in any chaos, no matter the situation, she said, her voice full of care. I stayed quiet, taking in what she said. Even though I initially thought about revealing my father's actions, I didn't want to cause more pain for anyone else. I guess the main question is if your mother knows about this, she said after a pause. Probably not, I answered. She looked at me carefully. Are you sure? Pretty sure. If she had any idea, I would have felt it. She can't hide things well. That gives you some power, Rebecca said. What do you want to achieve from this? I shrugged. I just want to connect with my little brother. I don't want revenge. I just want to move on from all this trouble and start fresh. Everyone? She asked, curiosity in her eyes. I'm sorry, I mumbled, looking down. I didn't mean to imply anything else. She moved closer and lifted my chin gently. I might have been a bit too much, but that's okay. Emotions can lead us to say things we don't mean. In those moments, it's hard to say what we really feel. I didn't mean to... No, it's fine, she interrupted softly. This isn't something to get stuck on. It feels different now. It's not what it appears. I don't see my current relationship the same way anymore. It feels like a part of my past. She gave me a kind smile. I understand that struggle. I truly hope you find peace as you move forward. What they all did to you is one of the worst things I've ever heard, and I've heard a lot. I nodded. So you're just going to stay up here and do nothing? Rebecca asked after a moment. What do you mean? You need to make a move. Coming up here was a reaction. Now you need to be proactive. In what way? Start with getting a divorce. I paused, then said, but it would have to be in Memphis. I haven't been here long enough. She smiled. Wrong, Mark. This is a game like poker. If you file here, what's she going to do? Ask to move it there? You really think her father will let her do that with all those reporters around? I don't think so. I smiled for the first time in a while. There's more, I said. Her father's trying for the White House. So he'll want to keep this quiet. I felt my body relax and sank into my seat. I didn't realize how tense I was until that moment, and now I felt lighter and happier than I had in a long time. Even Rebecca's next question didn't dim my relief at finally having a plan. Just one last thing to think about, she said. And that is? What will you do if she fights it? Are you really ready to share everything? It could affect not just her father's career, but your own father's, too. I smiled. She won't fight it. The threat alone would be enough to make her step back. She would do whatever her father told her to do. Are you sure? Rebecca asked. Absolutely. But I found out later I was wrong, very wrong. Early Tuesday morning, I was in the offices of Taylor and Galarza, attorneys at law. At 10:10, the receptionist opened the door, and Whitney Patterson saw me. She tried to smile and waved me in. I hesitated, but then got up and followed her. I thought Rebecca was taking care of this, I said. She handed it over to me, Whitney explained. If you're not comfortable, tell me now. and we can schedule you with someone else." We entered a small office filled with papers and files, but Rebecca said, "Working together changed that," Whitney said. She took a seat at her desk and gestured for me to sit across from her. "She mentioned this to you," Whitney nodded. "Yesterday afternoon, after the appointment was set up, she realized there could be a serious problem." "How so?" "Because lawyers can't have personal ties with their clients. It's against the rules." I thought about this and nodded. "Okay. How long have you been a lawyer?" "I've been a lawyer for 9 years and have handled divorce and civil law for the last 7 months. Before that, I worked as a prosecutor." She raised an eyebrow, challenging me to question her experience. I shrugged. "All right, this should be straightforward." "That's what Rebecca said. She would know." "What do you mean?" Whitney frowned a little as she considered how to reply. Finally, she decided to be honest. She was on the other side during my divorce and pointed out what needed to be said. So she's got experience. She says this should be simple. "She represented your ex-husband?" Whitney nodded, a small smile showing. "And now you work for her?" "I'm a capable lawyer, and they needed someone with courtroom experience." "But you're friends with your ex's lawyer?" "Strange, right? But she was easy to work with. She acted professionally and helped make everything run smoothly. You know the situation about my divorce. How could I blame her for suggesting what a judge would likely decide?" I just looked at her surprised. Lawyers are definitely unique. "So," Whitney said after a moment, picking up a pen and getting ready with her legal pad, "are we ready to start discussing your matter?" I nodded. I spent the next half hour answering her questions, then left with a form to fill out about my finances, and set up another appointment for Friday morning to sign the papers and get things moving. That night, Rebecca and I had dinner together. We enjoyed Cuban sandwiches with tomato soup. Rebecca stood beside me, leaning against the counter while I pressed the sandwiches and warmed the soup. "Whitney and I were talking," she said. "Oh?" I replied. "You told her about most things." "Yeah, pretty much. But you didn't mention why you came here, your younger brother." I stirred the soup and thought for a moment. "Does she really need to know?" "I think so." "And you didn't tell her?" "No, I wasn't sure if you'd want me to." "Then why bring it up?" "Because I want you to tell her yourself." "And what if I don't?" "Then I won't say anything, that's for sure." I looked at her. Her warm brown eyes seemed to see right through me. "I know this is tough for you, Mark," she said gently. "I don't want to push you, but you shouldn't be caught off guard, especially since your lawyer isn't prepared either." I nodded. She had a point. Still, I wanted to keep it private. "Let me think about it, okay?" "That's fair." I finished making the sandwiches, poured the soup into bowls, and carried mine to the table with Rebecca close behind. She dipped her sandwich in her soup, took a bite, and chewed slowly while watching me. "What?" I asked after she swallowed. She smiled. "Just because my last name is Galarza doesn't mean you have to make Latin sandwiches when I'm around." I laughed. "Come here," I said, taking a bite of my sandwich before getting up to head to the freezer. I opened the freezer door and she peeked in. "Left to right," I said, nodding toward the containers of frozen sandwich fillings. "Sunday through Saturday, Mexican beef ribs, shredded Thai chicken from last night, pulled pork for tomorrow, and so on." She looked at me and chuckled softly. "You really have a plan for everything, don't you?" "What can I say?" I said, closing the freezer door. "I'm a lawyer. I like being organized." She just shook her head and went back to the table. We finished our meal and then took a walk, chatting easily. Neither of us brought up anything more than friendly conversation. It was understood. No crossing lines until the divorce was finalized. After Rebecca left, giving me a friendly kiss on the cheek, I almost called Whitney to speed things up. But knowing they had talked about me, and what Rebecca and I had shared, made me hesitate. If I seemed too eager, Rebecca might be put off. This got me thinking about Rebecca. She was in her mid-30s, smart, funny, and independent. Yet she had never been married. Why? That question kept floating in my mind, and I wasn't sure of the answer. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Ferlin Fargo while cleaning up the bar after lunch. "Sure," he replied, not looking up from his newspaper. "You're divorced, right?" "Yep." What's dating like for a divorced guy? It's tough. Why's that? He finally looked at me, thinking about why dating was hard for people like him. It's like this, he said slowly. For guys like us, it doesn't mean we're back to being single with lots of eager people to choose from. You're what? 30? 32. He nodded. I was 36. The thing is, women in their 30s are usually one of two types. They're either divorced or not looking for marriage. Not looking for marriage? They don't want to get married. Or if they are dating, it often feels complicated and things don't get serious before they break down. Or they just have a hard time being serious at all, I added. They're too independent and don't want to be tied to anyone. Exactly, he said, setting the paper aside and leaning in. And the divorced ones? They can be tricky too. How's that? You have to figure out why they divorced. Was it because of spending too much? Were they too demanding? Hard to please? It's not always the fault of the woman, I insisted. Those things could easily apply to their ex-husbands too. He smiled and nodded. Exactly. That means they might be very careful. The worse their marriage was, the more they felt let down, the more they might see every man negatively. I thought about this and then asked, why did you and Denise break up? He shook his head sadly. That was my fault. I was always working. Then why do you still see each other? We care about each other. She's the only one for me, always will be. But her? She cares, but she can't handle my absence. I work long nights and only a few hours on weekends. It's tough for having a family or a marriage. Have you ever thought about slowing down? His smile was bittersweet. Sorry, buddy, but that's just me. Might as well ask a leopard to change its spots. And she knew this from the start? It didn't start that way, but that's how it turned out. But you still spend time together? When we can. We just aren't married anymore. That's too bad. Yeah, he sighed. If only. I really thought about what Ferlin said. It wasn't enough to just solve one problem, only to face a lot more problems that I wasn't ready for. I really had to think about what life would look like after a divorce. Take Rebecca, for instance. She was a year or two older than me, wonderful, and still single. She had never hinted at any serious relationships before, which was unusual. Women around my age, like my secretary, my wife, and others I knew, often talked about their past relationships, even just to let off steam. But Rebecca never said a word about it. Was she really too strong to ever consider marriage? Or did the idea just not interest her? Did it even matter to me? We had shared one special moment, and I could count the deep conversations we had on my fingers and still have some left over. Yet I felt a connection with her. She was the first person I had really bonded with since I realized the life I had led for over 7 years was not what I thought. I felt a bit anxious that she might be my best chance at finding happiness, as being single seemed closer than ever. Then there was Whitney. She had faced troubles in her marriage, and I sensed she might never really be content. Did that mean she could find joy again? Or would she panic at the first sign of trouble? I didn't think about romance with her, but I worried she showed one part of what being divorced could be like. I had often seen another side of the divorced experience, too. Women who had been unhappy, sometimes for good reasons, and who believed that all men were unkind. They often voiced their feelings about men loudly, eyeing any nearby men as if challenging us to disagree. I wasn't interested in getting into that kind of discussion. The most troubling situation was Ferlin and Denise. You know the type. A couple that divorced but still had strong feelings for each other. Any new man in a woman's life might be compared unfairly to her former partner, often falling short. Maybe with time, those who were angry could heal, but those who clung to the past would remain stuck. Was this fair? Fairness didn't matter. It was just how things were. By Friday morning, I decided that Rebecca was right. I had to do something. So I went in, looked over the papers, and signed my request to end my marriage, along with a few other forms. Later, I told Whitney a little about my younger brother. She listened intently, and when I finished, she asked, "Are all the people down there just unkind?" On Sunday afternoon, I spent 5 hours with Teddy Cooper working on what I believed was my best song. By the end of his feedback, I felt hopeless about it. "This A chord?" he asked, playing it in question. "Yes," I replied. "I change it to this," he said, playing a different sequence of chords that transformed the sound. "Sure," I said. "It does sound better. Do you think it really works?" "It will if we add a special chord here," he said, then carefully improved the music step by step. By the time we finished a couple of hours later, parts of my original music were still there, but they were hard to recognize. Next, we spent an hour cleaning up the words. It was exciting and a bit frustrating to watch him create. His ideas came quickly and were always on target. In the final hour, we worked on a part of the song he thought it needed. He was right, and I had tried something similar before. He looked at what I thought was a good idea and said, "This is close, but let's tweak the words and the music." When I was about to leave just before 6:30, I felt like I should race home and get rid of all my other songs before he had a chance to go over them. He must have noticed my worry because he put his hand on my shoulder as I was at the door. "Mark?" "Yes?" "You're really talented. Maybe not the best yet, but you have a gift here." "Thanks," I said, getting ready to leave. He held my shoulder a little tighter. "You know, the songs Nick and I write usually take a lot of time. Sure, sometimes we get one done really fast, but most of them take days or even weeks. Some take months or years before we get back to them with a new idea." I nodded, not really convinced. "In just one afternoon, you've got a piece that's almost ready to share. It needs some work, but I want Nick to hear it and think about it. Just something about it feels special. But anyway, that's really impressive." I looked at him and said, "It feels almost like a different song." "No way. Same words, just a few changes, same music, just improved a little, and the same melody with maybe just a few notes changed." I shrugged. "But I would never have thought of those changes." He smiled. "This is my job, man. I do it every day of the year. You get better at something when you do it all the time, right?" "I hope so, because right now I feel pretty unsure." He let go of my shoulder and playfully tapped my arm. "Don't feel that way. You'll improve. Just wait and see." "Okay," I said, picking up my guitar case and moving toward the door. Once outside, I paused and turned back. "Hey, Teddy?" "Yeah?" "Don't show Nick my song unless I'm there, all right?" "Why's that?" "I want to understand how he thinks about it, too. It'll help me learn faster." "Sure thing, man, no problem. When he has some time, I'll call you and we can plan something together." "Thanks. Next week, then?" "I'll see you then," I replied, waving goodbye. I still felt a bit unsure. On Monday morning, Ferlin came up and asked if I could perform again next Saturday night. Same time, same setup, just like before. Golden Rodeo still wasn't ready, it seemed. "Sure," I said. "Great," he replied, then took out 4 posters for my upcoming show. "I'd hate to think I went through the trouble of making these for you to say no." On Wednesday night, it was my turn to be at Rebecca's house while she was cooking. Whitney was there too, which was fine since everything was calm for now. "So what will you do when this is all finished?" Whitney asked. "I have no idea. I'll probably just keep bartending for a while." "And that doesn't get boring? All the education you have and you're going back to bartending?" she wondered. "I enjoy it. I don't have to think too hard, and it's nice to be around people who aren't always dealing with tough problems." "You'll get bored, though," Rebecca said. "Once this is over, I give you about a month. Then one day you'll be standing there thinking, 'What am I doing here?'" "Trying to meet new people," I joked. She turned and smiled at me. "You're silly." "Still," Whitney argued, "you don't want to get back into your old work?" "I don't have a license in Illinois, and I'm not going back to Tennessee. Never." "What about teaching?" Rebecca suggested. "I don't know. I've never done it." "Not a bad idea," Whitney said. "Chicago has several law schools. And there are others nearby, too," Rebecca added. I laughed. "Really? Can you picture me lecturing a classroom full of eager law students about rules or contracts?" "Actually," Whitney said, looking at me thoughtfully, "I can see it." "Just keep it professional," Rebecca advised. "And with your background, I bet one of those schools might consider you if they have any jobs open." I shook my head. "I doubt it." Whitney took out her phone and began typing. "I'm going to call around tomorrow to see what's available." "Is this part of your job as my lawyer?" She smiled at me, but Rebecca replied, "She understands what it's like to go through tough times. Sometimes you just need a change, even if it's not the best for you. She wants to help you avoid the same issues many of our other clients face." "Did that happen to you?" I asked Whitney. She shook her head. No, but that was only because Rebecca saw me feeling down one day after I left the state's attorney's office. She helped me stay focused. Do you do this for your other clients? She feels grateful to you, Rebecca said, so she's putting in extra effort. Grateful to me? When you played that song a few weeks ago, the one where you said you wouldn't play until someone asked us to dance, well, someone asked her to dance, and now she's interested in him. I glanced at Rebecca and then at Whitney, who shyly smiled. He's her favorite too, Rebecca added. Stop it, Whitney said. Oh, come on, you know it's true. Whitney looked from Rebecca to me and said, so far so good. Is he your first since the divorce? She shook her head. Just the first one who isn't looking for something brief. I placed my hand over hers. Well, that's great. She held my hand warmly and said, it does get better, Mark. Trust me, it really does. It just takes time. I still hadn't spoken to Clarice Talbot, and both Rebecca and Whitney were encouraging me to make a move. Feeling a bit anxious, I decided to go directly to her house. We had sat near each other for 2 games, so I wasn't a total stranger. That Thursday night after work, I went to her front door and knocked. Clarice looked surprised when she opened the door, and I said, Do you have a moment to— Suddenly, she shut the door quickly. I was taken aback. Then I heard her voice inside. Yes, he's here right now. Pause. No, I don't know that. I told you I don't know that. What was going on? I wondered. Then I realized they must have found out where I was and knew I'd come to her, and they were likely nearby, right on the other end of that phone call. I got into my car and left, confused about how they managed to track me down. Whitney called me at 7:30 the next morning. She was served, she said, at your condo last night around 9. Not the night before? I asked. Last night, she repeated. 9. Thanks, I replied, then hung up. Let the days unfold. It was almost 11 when I returned from my break. The crowd was mostly the same as before, a sea of people enjoying the lively atmosphere in the dance area and packed at the bar. I played some new songs, but it didn't seem to bother anyone. After playing in a cover band for 5 years, I had a wide selection of popular hits from the past 5 decades at my fingertips. Whitney was there with her friend from last time, and they were clearly focused on each other. He was a nice-looking guy, maybe 7 or 8 years older than her, with a few gray strands in his short hair and sharp eyes. He didn't miss much, which suggested he might have a job that required being very attentive. Rebecca sat with them and danced occasionally, accepting offers from others around her. They were joyful dances, filled with laughter, fun, and lots of playful turns and spins. Teddy brought his wife, and later Nick Harlan and his wife joined us. When I met Nick during a break, he mentioned he wanted to see who had used his guitar while he was away and that he planned to come around more often. I started the second set at Whitney's request with, You've Got a Friend. Apparently, it was her song with her new friend. Slow songs usually work best when played in pairs or threes, so I took off my capo and was about to start Change the World when I noticed her sitting to my right. It happened so fast. One moment, I saw a group of people, and the next moment, she was right there in her bright yellow blouse and tan pants, looking a bit nervous but hopeful. I quickly put my capo back on, at the 5th fret this time, and began to sing, keeping my eyes on her. I wish you love and happiness. I guess I wish you all the best. I hope you don't make the same mistakes I did and fall for someone like you. Because if you felt like I do, you would walk around like a little kid. But kids don't know. They can only guess how hard it is to wish you happiness. I sang the whole song while looking at her. By the time I reached the second verse, her eyes were filled with tears, and she seemed a bit shaky when I finished. As the last note faded, she turned and blended into the crowd, and I didn't see her again that night. It was tough to stay focused, but I managed. I played until last call and then stayed on stage until most people had left. What's wrong? Rebecca finally asked. Sandy was here, I answered. Her eyes narrowed and a knowing smile appeared on her face. Showtime. I thought to myself that I definitely didn't want to find her on the other side of any of my cases. The next day, Nick Harlan quickly worked to finalize Sweet Marlene, my first chance at success. He also suggested a faster tempo, and then played and sang it about twice as fast as I had imagined. That's it, Teddy agreed. I just didn't see it that way. I nodded, agreeing but feeling indifferent. I tried to focus on the next song we worked on, a heartfelt tune that felt right at a slower tempo. They were surprised when I suddenly disagreed with their suggested changes and made the lyrics deeper and more meaningful. They both liked the final product. The song had much more emotional depth that way. Then they exchanged a knowing look, especially Nick. "Tough situation, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "Just make sure you never go through that again." I looked at him, impressed that he had quickly understood what I was dealing with. His calm look showed that he had dealt with tough situations before and knew exactly what he was saying. Without saying anything more, I joined in, focusing closely on their ideas. Being with someone who understood felt comforting for some reason. As I finished my shift on Monday night, I couldn't help but think back to Saturday. One moment she was gone, and then suddenly, she was right there. "What are you doing here, Sandy?" I asked. She paused, seeming unsure of what to say. I said, "Looking for you, Mark." I let out a small laugh. "Why? Am I getting in the way of Daddy's big plans to be president?" She looked at the ground for a moment, then back at me. "Yeah, Mark," she said, trying to hold my gaze but faltering. "You are getting in the way of Daddy's plans, but that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" "To say I'm sorry." "Apology accepted. You can leave now." "And to win you back," she said. I tried to hide my doubt, but it seemed obvious from her expression that I wasn't doing a great job. "Really? Win me back?" She nodded, her face showing that she was searching for the right words. "You have every reason to be upset with me, Mark. I know you— Daddy must be worried about this situation, right?" She sighed in frustration. "I know what you think, Mark, but you don't know everything." "That's where you're wrong, Sandy. I know it all." "Sure, they didn't share their little plan before we got married. I only found out a couple of months ago when I heard our families talking about it on my break. That weekend at the governor's mansion. Remember?" She nodded. I felt a hand on my shoulder from behind and heard Ferlin say, "Why don't you two sit in the dining room? I've already put her salad there and you can talk in private." "Sure, Ferlin," I replied, still glaring at Sandy. I turned and walked to a table in the far corner of the dim dining room, away from the few other occupied tables. From behind me, I heard Sandy say, "Sorry about this." "Doesn't sound like I'm the one you need to convince," Ferlin said. "Go talk it over with Mark." She followed me to the corner of the dining room but paused before taking her seat. I realized she hadn't expected my anger at the whole situation, but I wasn't happy to deal with it either. My fingers drummed on the table, my right knee bounced up and down, and I kept my head turned, looking out at the half-empty parking lot. Finally, Sandy sat and reached for my hand, but when her fingers touched my skin, I instinctively pulled away. "Just eat your salad, Sandy." She lowered her eyes. "I know you don't believe me. Honestly, I wouldn't believe me either, but I'm telling the truth. I want another chance. Not for my father or his campaign, but for me, for us. That's all I want." I stared at her, my words sharp and harsh. "Yeah, you have quite a history. You really want to come back and be with me for real this time. Does that mean you won't wander off again, or are you just hoping the baby is mine?" She held back tears. No one had ever talked to her like that, and she struggled to keep herself together. She tried to look firm, but instead she looked down at her salad, picking at the lettuce. "I thought you knew," she said quietly. "Knew what?" "That our marriage was just to help our parents. It wasn't supposed to be serious. I thought they told you." "Well, they didn't, okay? I know that now. My mom only told me that a few weeks ago." I leaned over the table, my eyes intense and my voice urgent. "You really couldn't tell? You thought I was just playing along with this act?" She bit her lip, trying to find the right words without making me angrier. With a deep breath, she decided to be honest. "Not a good idea," I thought. "We used to joke about you, me and my friends, when you weren't around. You were so sweet and caring. We compared you to a puppy. I just thought, we all thought, that you were trying to win my heart for real." Frustration warmed my face as I struggled to keep my voice low so others wouldn't hear. "You mocked me? For trying to be a good partner? For wanting you to love me? I thought you loved me. I believed I was the luckiest person ever. And you laughed at me? You thought I was just some silly joke?" Tears began to fall from her eyes. I see that now. I feel so terrible about it. I truly feel... How you feel doesn't change anything. You treated me like a friend all those years, living your life however you wanted. You and your friends laughed at me and looked down on me. Now you think I'm just supposed to accept that? You really think I should just say, oh, it was just a mistake. Let's move on, because I can trust you now that I know all of this. You really believe it can work that way? Sandra wiped her eyes with her napkin, trying to regain her calm as I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. My anger was starting to fade, replaced by growing disbelief. Her next words caught me off guard. After about a year and a half, maybe 2 years, I thought about it. Not just this one moment, but everything over time. I noticed how you treated me and how happy you seemed. And you know what I realized? That I really wasn't the smartest one out there? She shook her head. No. I started to see that I was genuinely happy. I really liked being with you and looked forward to coming home each night just to unwind together. I thought you were trying hard to make everything perfect, but that didn't matter anymore. You made it real, Mark. I realized I had fallen for you and was happier than I had ever been with anyone else. When they made their rude comments, I told them to stop. I said you were amazing, and we were truly married and in love. Why did it take so long? I asked, leaning over the table to look at her. And why did you feel the need to be with someone else? You don't. While I was doing my best to manage everything at home and help someone in trouble, why did you choose someone else? Let me explain, she said, her voice getting louder in her frustration. A few other diners looked our way, but I could only give a weak smile. Okay, I said softly. Explain yourself. You have to remember, Mark, she said, her tears drying as she showed determination in her expression and urgently asked for my understanding. I thought you were as involved in this as I was. I thought they had told you the same things. Just go along with this, and if, after a while, you want to move on and find a real marriage, then do it. We'll make it work. That's what I believed they told you. But I never did anything to make you think I was leaving, Sandy. Never. Wrong, Mark. Everything that happened made me think you were moving on. Made me think you had found someone else. I don't think so. Try to see it from my side, Mark. Imagine being me, and suddenly, after 3 years at the same job, you come home late every night. You work weekends and long hours. You hardly spend time with me. But you knew what was happening, I shot back. I told you many times. No, I only knew what you shared with me. I didn't know if it was true. But it felt like more than that. You pulled away from me. You had big cases before, but you hardly talked about this one. You just said you were working to help someone who was innocent. You didn't share how your days went or anything. But I'm a lawyer, I protested. That stuff is private. That never stopped you from at least sharing general ideas before, did it? I thought about that moment. She was right. I had been so worried about everything that I kept it all inside. And our relationship changed too, Mark. How would you feel if suddenly, after such a great time together, we barely saw each other once a week? You might wonder if someone else was involved. And if you knew about how our marriage started, you might think I was looking to leave. But I told you, I argued. I even tried to change. That Sunday, I said I'd be home, but you said you'd be back by 1 or 2, Mark. I waited until a little after 2, got tired of waiting, and left. I went out for dinner with a coworker. We got along well, and I realized I needed to think about my own happiness since you weren't around. We had some nice moments together, but it didn't happen again after that. But you never talked to me about it, I said, feeling overwhelmed by her words. You never just asked me. Tears rolled down her cheeks now, but there was urgency in her voice. She needed me to understand, and she tried harder. You're still thinking about this your way, Mark. You need to see it my way. I'm in a marriage that I thought would end. You knew about it. I joked about it often. I didn't get the jokes back then, I replied, but I understand now. Yeah, but you went along as if you understood. Now I see you pulling away completely. You're not spending time with me. You're not talking to me. You're not sharing anything with me. Every time we're together, you seem lost in your own world, hardly noticing me. Our connection has faded for months. What would you think? I thought about it and kept coming back to the same idea. But if you were really happy, why didn't you say anything? If you thought I was moving on, Why didn't you talk to me? Because I knew the truth from the start, and I thought you did too. I worried you might ignore my feelings. I closed my eyes, trying to picture everything. Sandy's voice broke through my thoughts, shaking everything up. When I finally saw that news conference, I realized you weren't pulling away from me, that you weren't starting a new life without me. I could see it when his mother hugged you. You looked both sad and relieved. I saw it in your face. It was like a weight had been lifted. But from what you'd said before, you still had worries about us. That's when I knew I'd made a big mistake, and I promised myself I would do everything to make you feel valued in our marriage. I looked at her, searching for words. Sandy wiped her cheeks, brushing away the tears. She must have seen my confusion and offered a small smile, a smile not filled with happiness but with mixed feelings. Instead, it was filled with sadness and a bit of nostalgia in her eyes. The 3 years after that were the happiest years we had together, weren't they? I hesitated, thinking it through, then said, yeah, they were really good. Because I made a promise to myself that I'd change things for us. I was determined to make you love me so much you'd never want to go away. Well, I began, but she interrupted me with more tears and sniffles. And then, just when I thought we'd be together forever, right when you finally asked if we could start a family together and I felt sure you'd always be with me, you left, Mark. You just vanished. At that moment, she lost it and cried really hard. I wanted to comfort her, but it was hard with everyone else watching us. Then, with one last sob, she pushed her chair back and rushed out. I was too shocked to move until I heard someone walking heavily toward our table. That didn't seem to go well, Ferland said, his voice filled with sadness, matching how I felt. He didn't sound confused, though. Both of them were at my apartment this time. We were sitting on the floor eating grilled cheese with bacon and spinach, dipping it in tomato soup from big mugs. Grilled cheese and tomato soup was my favorite childhood meal, but I couldn't feel warm and cozy listening to Whitney and Rebecca talk like I wasn't even there. That really changes things, Whitney said softly. I mean, I can see her side of it. Only if you believe her, Rebecca replied. But it all adds up, right? If she didn't care for him, she could have left too. Or could have just stayed with the new boyfriend she started seeing. But he said they were happier at the end than at the start. And that look on her face when he asked about starting a family, how do you explain that? I don't know, Rebecca said. Maybe a need for family or something. I don't think so. Her answer seems simple and makes the most sense. That's when she knew he wouldn't leave. That's when the whole arrangement felt real. Yeah, but it was based on misunderstandings, all of it. And she played a part in that. Think about it. If she really thought he understood, wouldn't she have brought it up more directly? There's that, Whitney agreed. It does sound a bit far-fetched. I could see it coming out during a fight. Did that ever happen, Mark? Huh? I asked, listening but not really focused. Did you two ever argue, yell at each other and get frustrations out? I shrugged. Sure. Doesn't everyone? And she never brought this up as a problem? The arrangement? Yeah, I said, then added, no. I guess there were those same comments, just said louder instead of joked about. You know, like saying, I don't know why I ever agreed to this. Things like that. See? Whitney said. I can imagine it happening like that, can't you? Especially if she thought he knew all along. That's not right, Rebecca said sharply. So what do you think? Whitney asked me. I don't know. I think I believe her, but I'm not sure it really matters. So, you believe her? Rebecca said, surprised by my trust. Yeah, I do. You weren't there, Beck. She was really upset. I can't imagine she was just pretending. But she fooled you for years, Rebecca pointed out. She wasn't pretending then. She was just being Sandy, trying to make the best of a bad situation at first and then honestly trying to work on our marriage. She wanted to keep it together. So yes, I believe her. It all makes sense. Yeah, but... You didn't see her expression when she talked about our families, I interrupted. She wasn't even angry at that moment. She was confused, like she couldn't believe they never told me. Rebecca scoffed, and I pushed my plate away while Whitney placed her hand on mine. I think you need to talk to her again. You need to sort things out. The divorce is still there if that's what you want. And I think you should take it, Rebecca added. But, Whitney continued, looking at Rebecca. You don't want to look back 10 years from now and wonder what if. What if she was serious? What if the girl you dreamed about really loved you and wanted a future with you? What if she hurts you again and you just accept it? Rebecca argued. What if you keep going along with their games and they get what they want? What do you get, Mark? I stood up and walked quickly to my room, shutting the door behind me. I needed time alone to think. Lying on my bed, I reflected on what Whitney had said. They both made good points. We were all lawyers and we understood each other's thoughts well. Law school changes how you think. They taught us in criminal law that actions without the right intention are just actions. If you're on a roof and accidentally drop something that hurts someone, it's an accident, not a crime. But if you see people below and you let it fall on purpose, that's a serious matter. In each example, you caused an injury, but it matters why you did it. But Rebecca had a point too. Ignoring the truth isn't a good excuse. If you purposely drop something without checking if it will hurt someone, it still could be a crime. So I had to ask myself, did Whitney ignore what was happening? Did she realize I was unaware? Should she have said something? Would I have acted differently if I were in her position? The last situation was especially tough because I had to imagine being someone extremely well-liked. There was a light knock at the door. "Can I come in?" Rebecca said, opening the door and peeking inside. I looked at her, and she paused before entering and shutting the door behind her. She walked over to the bed and sat next to me, resting her hand on my leg. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish things were different because you don't deserve any of this." "You don't have to—" "Yes, I do. I told you that first night I don't usually get involved with married men, and I've let myself care about one. That's not fair to you, especially now." I sat up and leaned against the wall, gazing at her. "Why have you never been married?" She gave a gentle smile. "I'm just not the marrying kind, Mark. If you're thinking about leaving her for me, it wouldn't lead to marriage." "But why not?" She looked off into the distance, her gaze thoughtful. "We all have our pasts and things we carry with us. Some of us can move on, some can't. I don't think I can. I'd like to think that maybe you could help me, but I really don't know. And it wouldn't be fair to expect that." I nodded and placed my hand over hers. I wasn't sure what to say. "I guess what I mean is you need to think about yourself right now. Not about us, and not about what Sandy said. You need to focus on what you want. It's about you, Mark. Not Sandy or your parents. It's time to do something for yourself. Once you know what you want, then you can talk to Sandy again and see if she's part of that." I considered her words. She was right. It came back to what they both had mentioned before. It was time to take charge of my own life. I had thought I was in control, but now it was clear I needed to be more proactive in shaping my future. "We'll still see each other, right?" She smiled and replied, "Of course we will." I leaned over and gave her a soft kiss. It felt warm and brought us closer, creating a moment of understanding between us. I embraced the moment, feeling it might be our last connection for a while, if not forever. I rested my cheek on her hair and gently touched her shoulder, experiencing a brief feeling of calm that I had been missing all night. It was nice, and I wondered if I would ever find such comfort again. Just when I thought I had enough to manage in my chaotic world, the door of the hitching rail opened at 11:15 the next morning, and my parents walked in, looking frustrated, yet determined. "Hey, Mom and Dad," I greeted them cheerfully, then turned to my strong boss beside me. "Ferlin, meet my parents, Senator and Mrs. Roberts." "Mom, Dad, this is Ferlin." "Nice to meet you," Ferlin said, sounding uninterested. He turned and headed back toward the kitchen. "He's not your boss," Dad said quietly. "Jim Parker is your boss." "What are you doing, Mark?" Mom asked. "I'm working," I answered. "I'm a bartender now." "What kind of game is this?" Dad asked. "You quit without telling anyone, then left Sandy and came to this small town. What were you thinking?" "Come on, Dad. You know why I'm here. You think it's just a coincidence that I'm in the same town as Clarice Talbot? You think I chose this town without a reason?" Dad looked shocked, and Mom's eyes widened in surprise. "You didn't know she was here?" I asked, smiling. "Her and your son? The brother you never mentioned?" They exchanged worried looks before turning back to me. Dad looked defeated, and Mom leaned against the bar for support. "What have you done?" Dad asked, concern in his voice. "I tried to find the truth," I replied. "For once, I wanted to learn the truth about all of you. And don't tell me you didn't know she was here. Someone made her scared. She's too afraid to even look at me." "Pat Trulson's people found you," he said, thinking quickly. "We were asking around, but it was his people who found you. He didn't explain how." "Please tell me you didn't confront her," Mom said, her voice tense. "Why? Afraid I'd mess everything up for you?" "It's not what you think, Mark," Dad said, his voice heavy with sadness. He looked troubled and added, "Please, not again." I looked between them, feeling the weight of the moment. This was even harder than finding out I had a brother I had never known. My frustration grew stronger, and I felt a sense of power seeing them so uneasy. "What do you care about what I think? After everything you've done to me, you really believe I'm worried about your feelings?" "How can you talk to us like that?" Dad said, banging his hand on the bar. "I don't know what's going on here, but I won't accept—" "You'll accept whatever I say," I shot back. "Just like I accepted you two putting your own interests above mine." "What are you talking about?" Mom asked, her eyes narrowing as she tried to understand how much I knew. "You know exactly what I mean. My marriage. You, Dad, Pat, and Deborah all made plans so you could assist Pat Trulson right around election time. I don't know what you got from it, but I'm sure you did." "What are you referring to?" Dad said, but my knowledge was clear, making it hard for him to stay calm. "Let's get to the point. During our weekend at the governor's mansion, I overheard you all. You and the Trulsons talked about convincing Sandy to marry me and stay married for a few years, all while keeping me in the dark and telling me to go after my dreams. I heard it all, Dad. I saw the two of you laughing about how unaware I was of what was going on." His face changed, but Mom stood firm. "What does it matter how it all started? We made it happen, Mark. We helped you reach your dream. You can't say you weren't happy the whole time. So go on, tell us what we did that was so wrong." "You arranged a marriage where she could leave whenever she wanted after a year or two. You told her that, right?" "Why does it matter what we told her?" she answered, holding her ground. "She didn't leave, did she? You're still together, right? It doesn't matter how it all began. What matters is that you're married to someone you love." "It matters, Mom, especially now that I know the truth. It matters more than ever." "Why should it matter now that you know? She still wants to stay with you. Deborah said she doesn't want a divorce. She wants to be with you forever." "I'll tell you why it matters," I said, thinking back to my conversation with Whitney under the stars. "It matters because now I doubt everything about my marriage. My memories feel different now. You think back to when you first met, and you remember the excitement, right?" Dad nodded, but Mom frowned. "Well, I don't see it that way anymore. When I think about when Sandy and I started dating, I only see how I might have been misled. Every moment I thought she was happy and in love with me. Now I worry she might have felt differently. How does that feel, Mom? Want to share some of your memories?" Mom looked angry and determined, but I could tell Dad was starting to shrink under my words. "I'm sorry, Mark. I didn't realize." "Didn't realize what, Dad? That I would ever find out? Or if I did, you didn't think I'd care about what you did? Which part exactly didn't you think?" He met my gaze with sadness. "I didn't think about any of it, especially you. I got so wrapped up in it all that I barely gave it a second thought." I turned to Mom, who simply scoffed. "Grow up, boys. The world is tough. If you want something, be ready to fight for it." I just stared at her, surprised by her words. There was no regret, not even a hint of an apology. Instead, she seemed proud, like she was explaining life to a couple of naive kids. "Where is this coming from?" I asked, bewildered. "Where did my mom go, and when did this attitude take over?" "Don't you dare!" she shot back, leaning closer. "Leave!" Ferlin said from behind them. Mom froze, and Dad looked surprised. "Right now," he said firmly. "Get out, and don't come back." Mom turned to him with a challenging look and said, "You will not—" "I said, right now." He raised his voice, stepping toward her. She looked at him for a moment, then turned to me and said, "This isn't over, Mark. Not even close." After giving Ferlin a hard look, she turned and stormed out the door. Dad glanced between Ferlin and me, then back to Ferlin. "I'm really sorry about all this," he said softly. Ferlin just shot him a glare. With one last sad look at me, Dad slumped a bit more and left. The lunch rush and the cleanup afterward were a blur. I felt confused and overwhelmed by the busy atmosphere. Ferlin stayed quiet. At first, Debbie zipped around, switching out plates and drinks. After a while, she took charge of the orders, delivering them all on her own and not letting me help. I felt useless. I was more of a bother. Yet, Debbie never complained. She kept smiling, sharing encouraging words and laughter. Close to 3, the place had emptied out, and Ferlin plopped down onto a bar stool. That explains a lot. "What do you mean?" I asked, moving glasses around on the shelf mindlessly. "Last night with that woman, Sandy, I guess, your wife, and pretty much how you've been since you arrived here. My curiosity was piqued. How do you mean, how I've been since I got here? You don't really seem to fit in here, tending bar. Seriously, Mark, you're bright and friendly. You dress nicely. What did you do before?" "I was a lawyer." He snorted. "I guess that explains the interest you've had from those women. Still, you don't really seem the type." "What makes you say that?" "You're too eager to make others happy. Most lawyers, they're super confident and focus on themselves. You seem different. You care about what others think and go out of your way to please them, hoping they'll like you." "And that's a problem?" "Your mom was right about one thing, Mark. You need to take care of yourself first, not everyone else. Find your happiness without needing others' approval. Stop trying so hard to make everyone happy. They'll either appreciate you or they won't, but you shouldn't feel like you have to go out of your way for them. All right?" "But," I started, then paused. He was right. I knew it too. I was still living in Stevie's shadow. Stevie didn't have to work for people to like him, he just expected it. Even so, he had his share of critics. You can't keep everyone pleased all the time. "Still," Ferlin said after a moment, "I think you have some things to figure out." "Like what?" He hesitated, looking at me as if weighing his words. Finally, with a relaxed sigh, he said, "I think you need to talk to your dad, not your mom. She's beyond help. But your dad, he could be struggling right now, and you should reach out to him, at least to understand more about this younger brother you think you have who's been kept away from you." I nodded. "Yeah, I kind of sensed that too. I don't know, maybe a sense of loss?" "Exactly," Ferlin said. "I'm thinking about him and how he feels about himself. It's more than just feeling sorry. He seemed worn out when he left here." "And what about the next step? What else do you think I should do?" He stood up from the bar stool and placed his hand on the counter. "You need to have a serious talk with your partner." I let out a heavy sigh, feeling a lot of pressure on me. I heard some bits last night. I tried to stay away, but I still caught some things. I caught most of what was said here today, too. I think there's something you're missing, or maybe something you haven't fully thought about. I went over the talks in my mind, trying to make sense of it, but coming up empty. "Can you help me?" I asked. "You told your family that your memories are all wrong, Mark, but some of them aren't. At least, not all of them. I heard your partner say she spent the last 3 years working to make you happy. She did her best to make you love her so much that you wouldn't want to leave. So maybe the early memories are a bit foggy, but the ones from later, those should be clear, right?" I paused, then nodded. "Exactly," he continued. "So now you need to think about whether those memories, the good ones that are real, are important to you, and if you want to grow from them, or if too much has happened to keep going." I leaned back against the cooler, staring at the floor. After a moment, I asked quietly, "What do you think I should do?" His voice dropped low, becoming a bit raspy. "I told you it's about you now. It's your decision to make and yours alone. I wish I could help you more, but I won't." I looked at him and tried to smile. "Thanks." "You're welcome," he said as he turned to leave, but then paused and looked back. "Honestly, I'd tell you to go out now and sort this out. You're not really needed here today, but maybe take some time to think before you talk to anyone else, okay?" "Yeah," I replied, going back to my work with a clear head and a lot of new thoughts. When I finished at 6, I asked Ferlin for the next day off. He just grunted. I took that as a yes. I sat on the small patio outside my dining room and played guitar in the cool autumn night, lost in my thoughts as my left hand formed chords and my right hand strummed random tunes. "Can you do me a favor?" she said from the shadows to my right. How did you find me? I asked. Your address was on the divorce papers, she replied, stepping into the soft light by the porch. She looked unsure. Oh, I said, still playing the strings as I looked at her. I hadn't noticed much the night before, but now she seemed a bit uneasy. Her hair was somewhat tidy, but just barely, and her jeans seemed to fit differently. Have you been taking care of yourself? Sure, she replied, though her voice suggested she was unsure. She chewed her lip, looking for something to do with her hands until she finally tucked them into her pockets. It gets pretty cold up here, she said, trying to lighten the mood. It's still warm in Memphis, though. Uh-huh. She fidgeted, her uncertainty clear. I'm sorry about last night. I shrugged and began to play an old Cat Stevens song, Moonshadow. It felt calming and matched the strange situation we were in. You mentioned a favor, she said. She paused and then asked, Can you play me a song? Which one? Calico Skies, she replied, as I figured she would. It had always been special to us, sweet and bittersweet, pretty and sad when you knew its meaning. Why don't you sit down? I suggested, nodding to the old lawn chair nearby. Okay. She hesitated before finally stepping over and sitting down, as if unsure about what I wanted. How did we end up here, Sandy? I asked, my hand finding the chord progression of our song. I used to think it was just luck, she said, glancing at the dark clouds covering the moon. We got married to help out our families, and then you showed me your care, and just when I thought you were done trying, I realized you weren't, and I wanted you to care for me more. It felt like I had stumbled into something amazing. So at first I was just an accident? I asked gently. She looked at me, trying to read my expression. I kept my gaze open, waiting for her response. You were never just an accident, Mark. It just didn't start the way it should have. But maybe if it had started differently, it wouldn't have happened at all. Because I wasn't really what you wanted back then? I pressed. She nodded, biting her lip again, her voice soft as the breeze when she said, But you became what I wanted. The only one I ever wanted. I nodded. How did that change? Was it guilt, or were you worried about finding someone else? She looked down, deep in thought. At first, it was more about being comfortable, not the crazy passion like in movies. We had those moments, but it wasn't always like that. Over time, though, it began to feel like it was, at least for me. It always felt special for me, I said, like a fairy tale. But it was real to me. She seemed to drift off in thought, looking at the clouds again. I remember when it turned for me. They were teasing you, Peggy, Tracy, and the others, about how polite you always were and how you made an effort to make me happy. I thought about you compared to their husbands and their lives. Their husbands were like Stevie. They were confident and sure of themselves and always acted like one of the guys. They expected dinner ready when they got home and didn't want to stay home on weekends because they had plans with friends. I found it hard to understand why I felt envy for them. I could see the tears in her eyes shining against the dark sky, and a small smile appeared on her face. She spoke freely, almost like she was just thinking out loud. Then something happened that I really didn't like. It hurt me, and I felt angry at you too. I was scared you would turn into one of those husbands like they had, and I didn't want that. It took you 3 weeks to even mention it, and by then I began to think it was about someone else. I thought you had met another woman and were planning to leave. When you finally told me it was a big project, I felt like you were pushing me away. It seemed like you wanted me to be the one to walk away. I didn't want to feel that way because deep down, I realized I really did care about you and wanted things to go well. If I hadn't developed feelings for you, I wouldn't have minded that you seemed distant. But I had fallen for you, and I felt frustrated with myself for that. I had stopped playing the guitar, captivated by a side of Sandy I hadn't seen before. She paused for a moment, then gave a sad laugh. The funny thing is, I knew the moment I saw you on that television. It should have been a happy time for you, but you looked so tired. You were the one afraid of losing me, not the other way around. I felt such shame then. It was too much. I was in my office with a group of people who were all congratulating me, saying how great it must be for me. But all I could see was the look in your eyes during that group hug. It looked like you were lost and scared. I felt overwhelmed. I'd never felt that way before, not even when Stevie passed. I remember rushing home to be with you, but you didn't show up. I just sat there hoping for another chance to be with you. And your boyfriend? I asked. She shook her head. It was just lunch, really. Maybe 4 or 5 times we went to his apartment after lunch during the last month. But the moment I saw you on that screen and realized you weren't trying to leave me, I never talked to him again. He understood quickly and didn't push it. I never did anything wrong, I said quietly. I know, she whispered. After a moment, she looked at me, trying to collect herself. I wasn't completely honest last night, Mark. In what way? I had a feeling then. I wasn't sure, but I had a feeling. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was scared that if I did, I would have to tell everything. I was worried that if I was completely honest, you might leave me. I never wanted that. Not then, not ever. I just wanted a chance to fix things, to pretend it never happened, so we could go back to how things were before. So you really thought we were married? She smiled at the thought and nodded. Yes, I tried my best, not for myself, but for you, for us. Hearing her words made me sad again, sad about what happened and how we seemed to have lost something special. Please give me a chance, Mark, please, I'll do anything you ask, just come back. That's not going to happen, I replied. Not now, not ever. She immediately bowed her head, covering her face with her hands, shaking with tears. I reached over and gently pulled her hands away, saying, I'm not saying we'll get back together, but if we ever do, I won't go back to Memphis, not even to visit. I won't help your father with his campaign, and I won't go anywhere near Tennessee again. What do you mean? She asked, quickly wiping her tears away, her eyes searching for hope. I'm still thinking it over, Sandy, but you need to take what I said seriously. She nodded. No more Tennessee. And our parents, I paused to gather my thoughts. They treated me poorly. I don't want to be around them. You need to think hard about that. If I decide to try again, you would have to move here. And I might just stay a bartender while playing music again. Her smile began to peek through her tears. You really want to live your own life? Yes, I do. I want to do things I've chosen, not what my parents pushed me to do. And you're still unsure about us because I'm part of that influence, right? She asked, her smile fading a bit. That's not the main reason. I'm still deciding about us, thinking back on how happy we were when things felt right. But you're worried the past might be too heavy, she said quietly, her expression turning serious. Yeah, I admitted, looking at her. She looked back at me and took my hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I squeezed back. After a moment, she asked, Can you at least play me that old song? I hesitated before letting go of her hand, then started to play the intro. It was written that I would love you from the moment I opened my eyes. The day I first saw you gave me life under bright skies. I'll hold you for as long as you want. I'll hold you for the rest of my life. It was easy to get Dad's phone number. Just call his office to find out where he was staying. It was tough talking to Dad because Mom picked up the phone. Yes, she answered sharply. I need to talk to Dad. After how you treated us yesterday? After letting that man talk to us like that in front of everyone? You think, just put him on or I'm hanging up. You can't make demands like that. I'm your mother, Mark. I heard Dad say something in the background and Mom replied, but I couldn't make out the words. Mark? Dad asked, sounding concerned. Mark, are you there? Breakfast in an hour, I said firmly. It's just you. Don't bring her, okay? Where? He asked. I told him the name and location of a small diner along the highway coming into town. When we hung up, Mom was still grumbling about it. I arrived 10 minutes late and saw Dad in a corner booth pouring himself some coffee. He looked worn out, showing signs of his 59 years with deep wrinkles and tired eyes. Thanks for calling and wanting to meet, he said when I slid into the booth. I don't want to meet. I just need the truth about Clarice Talbot. Let's get to it. He flinched at the name and looked defeated as I waved the waitress over to get us some coffee. The little boy isn't your brother, Dad said quietly. He's your nephew, Stevie's son. Really? Because she was just Stevie's secretary, right? Dad seemed lost in thought for a moment, the worry clear on his face. When I was busy with my work, Stevie had just gotten home from school. Clarice was my personal secretary. She was a hard worker, always willing to help out. I had a lot of campaign events to attend. I was running for re-election, remember? I nodded, remembering all the long days. He paused, so I urged him to keep going. You were still in school, so I didn't think you'd remember, but you know how busy it was. Yeah, I'm aware, I said, growing impatient. Sorry, he said, taking a sip of water before he continued. Anyway, we were in Chattanooga for the weekend attending rallies. I got back to the hotel pretty late after talking with some people. It was just past midnight, and I didn't think much about it since Stevie wasn't there. We were sharing a room, and Clarice was with one of the PR staff. I couldn't remember the other woman's name. And why does this matter? I asked, unable to hide my frustration. Can you just tell me what happened? He seemed lost in his thoughts, looking far away. I got a strange feeling like this had something to do with Stevie's death. I didn't see her right away. I only noticed the empty beds. I thought Stevie was out having fun. Then I heard a small noise coming from the corner like someone trying to hide. When I turned on the light, there she was, looking scared and trying to stay out of sight. Her clothes were messy, and she seemed really upset. I knew right away that something was wrong, even if it was hard to believe about my own son. Stevie hurt her, I said, saying what he couldn't. He looked at me, and after a moment he said, Yeah, I just don't understand what he was thinking. None of us will. But he did hurt her, and if he had been there when I arrived, I don't know what I would have done. What happened next? His lips shook as he tried to stay calm. I called the public relations person right away, for Clarice, of course. What else could I do? Why not call the police? I asked. He managed a bittersweet smile that soon softened. Of course, Mark. That's what you would have done, I know. I should have, too. But in that moment, I was caught up in everything the other woman was saying, thoughts and ideas racing through my mind. I could see it all. My Senate career falling apart, my son in trouble. Did you talk to Clarice Talbot? Of course I did, he said, keeping his voice low. Do you think I would ignore her? I'm not sure, I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. What happened next? She was helping Clarice with some clothes while I tried to find someone who could help the girl. Just when I started to lose hope, there was a knock at the door. It was the police, telling me that Stevie had been in an accident. So you kept it quiet, I said. You didn't say anything. He nodded slowly. What good would it have done to speak up? What about justice for Clarice Talbot? Would going public really have helped? She would have faced questions and gossip. Your mother was right, Mark. You can be so persistent sometimes. You talk like it's something to hide, Dad. Like I'm wrong for wanting to do what's right. Is that so bad? He lowered his head and said quietly, No. So when did you find out what was going on? And why didn't she think about other choices? 3 months later. At first, she thought it was just nerves from that night. But as time went on, her situation changed. And how did you find out? Did she call you? I visited her a couple of times a week to see how she was doing, to check if she needed anything. I was worried about her. He signaled for another cup of coffee and continued once it was filled. One day, I showed up to see her, and she told me she was pregnant. I was in shock. I didn't want to believe it. But she said she was keeping the baby. I think she's very religious, and her family is deeply involved in their faith. This made a hard situation even worse for her because I knew her parents were not supportive at all. So you decided to help her? I asked. I told her I would be there for her until the baby was born. After that, we could find a way to help her out and look for a job. And what did she say? Not much. I think she wanted to stay away from everyone, especially from me. And what about the baby? I don't even know his name, Dad admitted. The only way we keep in touch is through a postcard she sends whenever she changes where she lives. We send her money every month, without fail. His name is Skylar, I said, studying my dad's face. Your grandson is named Skylar. He plays football and is healthy, looking just like I did when I was little. I guess he takes after you. Stevie looks more like Mom, but your genes came through on this one. Dad looked surprised, as if he were imagining the little boy. Skylar? He repeated. Yes, Skylar. He lives about a mile away in a small house with a mother who still seems to be struggling. Now she's nervous because someone came to her door, mentioned me, and showed her my picture. I can't even meet her or connect with my nephew if she will let me. I wouldn't blame her if she didn't, given what she has faced with other Roberts men in her past. But that was Pat's side, Dad said. I didn't do anything. I don't want to hear excuses, Dad, I interrupted. I want to know what you are going to do about this now. He looked at me, determination taking over his face. He stood up, finished his coffee, and said, I'm going outside for a moment, and then you're going to take me to her, okay? Clarice Talbot wasn't home when we got there. Dad insisted we wait in the car until she returned. After 2 hours, I mentioned getting lunch, but he wouldn't leave. By 1:30, I felt like I needed to stretch my legs outside. He told me to go find a tree. He wasn't leaving. At 10 to 2, she drove into her driveway and got out of her car. Before she could walk to her door, Dad got out and called, Clarice, wait a moment. She stopped and slowly turned to him. I followed Dad as he crossed the street and walked up to her porch, looking up at her. Senator, she said, looking uneasy. Clarice, just take a moment to breathe, he said. I'm not sure what you heard, but you're not in any trouble, okay? She nodded, but it was clear she still had doubts. Dad checked around the house before turning back to Clarice. Do you mind if we come in for a moment? I think Mark here needs to use the bathroom. She glanced between us, then stammered, Sure. Come in. We walked into a neat living room with an old television, a worn love seat, and a second-hand rocking chair. The bathroom's down the hall, she said quietly, not meeting our eyes. First door on the left. I went to the bathroom, quickly washed my hands, and hurried back. Clarice was sitting on the love seat, her hands in her lap and her head down. Dad was in the rocking chair in front of her, speaking softly. I'm really sorry, he said. Why didn't you tell me? We're doing just fine. You're not fine, Clarice. I promised I'd help you, but you've got to let me. I did try to tell you, she said, looking up with a spark in her eyes. Last year I sent you a letter to your home so no one at the office would see it. I told you I was having a hard time. I never got it, Clarice. I really didn't. I had a feeling I knew where it went. Mom might have been involved. Well, I did, she insisted. I'm trying, Senator, but you have no idea how tough it is. What are you getting paid? I asked suddenly. How much are you getting for helping with Skylar and everything else? $1,500 a month, Dad replied. $400 a month, Clarice said at the same time. Dad looked shocked. It's $1,500. No, Dad, I said. It's $400. That's how I found out about it. I saw the financial records. It's always $400. He looked like he couldn't believe it. But what? It was supposed to be. Who set it all up? I asked. I don't know, he said. Maybe Jim Parker? But I didn't really tell him. It was meant to be. You left Mom in charge of it, didn't you? He nodded slowly, still shocked. And you, I said, looking at Clarice. You probably sent other letters to the house too, right? She looked at Dad and said, Yes. For 5 years. 15, maybe 20 letters. And when that man came to the door, he wanted to know what I found out, right? Yes, she replied softly, a bit tense. And he warned you that if you lied, it would be the end for you, right? Right. I looked from her to Dad. I think I figured it out yesterday, Dad. She's been through a lot. Mom's not exactly kind, and Stevie definitely picked up some of her traits. He stared at me, his face showing shock and disbelief about Mom's behavior. But you're going to fix this, right, Dad? He nodded. You're going to fix it now, right? He nodded again, this time quicker. Then get out your checkbook, now. He took it out of his jacket pocket. What are you waiting for? Start writing, I urged. He grabbed a pen and I turned to leave. I was a few blocks away when I heard her calling after me. I turned and saw Clarice Talbot running, trying to catch up. I stopped and walked back toward her. She leaned over, catching her breath. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know. It's why you came here, isn't it? Yes. And why you cheered at his games, too. Exactly, I replied. At first I thought he was my brother. I assumed you and Dad were together. You understand. What do you know? Pretty much everything. Dad told me this morning. He told me that Skylar is my nephew and that. She stood up, still trying to breathe normally. He told you that Stephen hurt me, that that's how it happened. I nodded and added, he also told me they were helping you and Skylar, but I noticed your house, and I thought they could do more. Plus, I remember the look on your face when you closed the door on me. I overheard you on the phone. So, you brought him here to tell me To fix everything, right? I didn't think you should live in worry because of what I did. How did you cause it? I left. Came up here to find you and my little brother. That's why I came. And you didn't tell anyone? It's a long story. I'd like to hear it sometime, she said, looking at me seriously. Whatever happened, it has to be more than just this. I've never seen anyone talk to your father like that. You wouldn't believe it. I'm afraid I would. Especially if it's about your mother. I think I'd definitely believe it. Yeah, well, maybe one day I'll tell you all about it. I looked at her for a moment, then turned to walk away. Hey, Mark, she called. I stopped and looked back. Yeah? I know he's not truly your brother, but he is your nephew, you know. I know. Well, I was just wondering if you'd want to meet him sometime. I smiled. I'd really like that. More than you know. I paused, then added, but it won't be too hard for you? Knowing I'm related to someone who, well, you understand. She shook her head. You're nothing like him. Nothing at all. And Skylar needs someone else in his life. So any time you can give him, I think it would help. A lot. I nodded. Be careful what you wish for. If things go my way, he'll be playing drums in a little band I want to start. She laughed. Thanks. Just what I need. A mini drummer banging away all the time. We'll figure something out at his game on Sunday if that works for you. That sounds perfect, she replied. And Mark, thank you. I really mean it. I waved her off and turned to face the chilly wind hitting my face. Sandy was right. It was cold up here. I decided I needed to grab some warmer clothes. There was no way I was leaving now. My afternoon had turned into a long trek from Clarice's place back to the diner to get my car. Then I called Whitney to set up a meeting for her and Rebecca. After driving around and thinking about everything for almost 2 hours, I finally made the appointment and shared everything that happened. My parents arriving, Sandy the night before, my brother, my nephew, and Clarice. The whole situation was overwhelming. When it was over, they both looked just as tired as I felt. They turned down food, so I headed back to my little apartment. It was dark when I got home, and I flicked on the kitchen light. I hadn't eaten all day, and my stomach was growling. Even though I still felt cold, I opted out of soup. So at 7:30, I found myself sitting alone at the table with an Italian beef sandwich with sweet peppers and a side salad. I didn't really taste my food, but the beer helped ease my nerves. I took one last look at the clock. It was 10 to 8, and I tossed my half-eaten meal into the garbage before heading to the bedroom. I opened the door and heard movement on the bed, then turned on the lights. Sandy was laying there, curled up on her side, sound asleep. I smiled, not worried about how she got in. I changed into some pajama pants and a t-shirt, then crawled into bed next to her. She stirred slightly, then settled back into a light snore. I lay there, happy, just watching her sleep for the first time in months. Then a thought crossed my mind. I had my answer if she had hers. I thought it was a dream, she whispered when the sun woke me up. I turned to her with a smile. How'd you get in? The patio door was unlocked. I guess you forgot to lock it last night. When did you get here? Late afternoon. I tried your workplace, but they said you took the day off. I must have fallen asleep while I was waiting. You did fall asleep pretty early. I went to bed just before 8 and you were already resting. I don't usually sleep that deeply. I'll record you next time. Are you serious? She asked, thinking it over. I sleep that soundly? Yep. What kind of sleep is it? What do you mean? You know, is it loud or soft? Like a soft sound that you can barely hear. The loud kind. Do not, she protested, then burst into laughter and playfully pushed me away. I smiled, thinking of the old Sandy, the one who was always full of energy. I came here to tell you something, she said after a moment. What's that? That I will go wherever you want and do whatever you want, however you want, she said, with a strong and sincere tone. Then her voice softened and she added, but only if you're willing to give us another chance. Please give me a second chance. Even if it means staying here? Here in this town or here in this little apartment? Does it matter? She shrugged. We can find a nicer place, you know, but if you want to stay here, then I will stay here with you. I smiled. You sure? But there's just one condition. What's that? I asked, curious. This new you? The one who's going to start doing what he wants? He still needs to keep the old you, too. Meaning? I fell for the Mark Roberts who cared for me and wanted to spend time together. If you want to play in a band and chase after your dreams, that's great. But I still want the Mark who sings to me and holds my hand and who usually lets me choose the movies. Is that Mark still here? So I have to keep watching those sentimental movies you always want to see? She nodded but didn't smile. She bit her lip and said, "Sorry. We can watch more of yours, but I still want to see some of mine." So what you're saying is, if we decide to try again, you want it to still be a partnership. I can't just be in charge, right? Something like that. Even if it gets playful and involves a little teasing. "Get out," she said, pushing me again with a laugh. "Teasing in this cold? Are you serious?" "So playful teasing is okay?" She gave a light shrug. "Sure, why not? You can handle it." I chuckled, then thought over what she had just said, growing quiet. Rebecca had brought up my past in a way I didn't expect. "What?" I asked. "I may have had a friend up here." "May have?" "Did." A worried look crossed her face. "Do you still have feelings for her?" "Never got that far." "But you're still in touch with her?" "Only saw her a few times, Sandy. We kind of just became friends." "But you—" "Yes." She closed her eyes and leaned back. "I really thought we were done," I explained, "that everything was a joke from the start." She opened her eyes, stared at the ceiling, and said, "Can we talk about this later? Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Definitely, I just need some time to think." "How so?" She turned to look at me. "You being friends with her makes me think of how things were 3 years ago. You felt like I did back then, like it wasn't really a marriage, so what's the big deal, right?" "Pretty much," I replied. "So how can I blame you for what happened? Especially since I acted the same way before." "I guess so, but still." She shook her head. "You did it after I showed you how much I cared for you for years. That makes it hurt more. But I also did the same thing to you after you showed me your feelings for so long." "I didn't do it to hurt you," I said. It doesn't matter if it only happened once," she said, gently touching my cheek. "What matters is that I need to handle it, okay? And I will. I promise." "If you need more time to think," I started, but she cut me off. "I don't need more time, Mark. I know what I want. We both have things to work on, okay? I just didn't expect this to be one of them. It caught me off guard." "What do you mean? Am I not enough?" "No," she said, smiling. "You're great, and I'm surprised I didn't find you in a crowd of fans when I got here." "Did I forget to mention them?" She laughed softly and playfully nudged me. "Go brush your teeth." "You sure have a spring in your step today," Ferlin said as I cleaned up after lunch. "Things are looking better, my friend." "Friend?" I smiled. "Things are definitely looking better." He studied me for a moment and then smiled back. "Good for you." "Thanks." "You're welcome." "No, I mean for everything, thanks." "I know what you meant," he grumbled. "And you're still welcome." "Does this mean you're leaving?" "Not right now, but soon." "Try to give me a week's notice, okay?" "I'll give you 3 days." "That works." Rebecca and Whitney came by after work for a drink. "You're getting back together, aren't you?" Whitney said, her face lighting up. "Looks that way." Rebecca seemed surprised at first, but then smiled and shrugged. "Oh, well, maybe next time." I leaned over to both of them and said, "This doesn't change anything for me. Other than Ferlin, Teddy Cooper, Nick Harlan, and the people around here, you're the only ones I know up here." "So you're staying here?" Rebecca asked. "Not going back to that high-paying job in Memphis?" "Staying here." "With her?" "With Sandy." "Yes." She smiled genuinely. "Cool." "Hey there," a guy said as he walked over. Whitney's face brightened, and she replied, "Hey to you, too." He leaned over to greet her, then looked at me. "Bottle of Bud?" "Aaron," Whitney said. "This is Mark Roberts, the one I've been telling you about." He gave me a friendly smile, but studied me closely. "Hey, Mark," he said, extending his hand. "You're a police officer, right?" I asked as we shook hands. "Did she tell you?" "No, just a lucky guess." When they all left a half-hour later, Rebecca caught my eye and then looked down at her hand on the bar. I looked down and noticed her sliding a small piece of folded paper toward the bar. When she lifted her hand, I focused back on her face. She had a bright smile as she walked away. I watched her leave before I picked up the note and read it. Loyola Law School has 3 openings for associate professors starting next fall, the note said. Just thought you might want to know. I thought about it and then tucked the note into my pocket. I was definitely interested. After work, Sandy joined me for a drink and we were sitting in a corner when her father walked in with my dad. "Mark," he called, forcing a smile. "Pat," I replied, staying seated. He paused and his smile faded a bit, but then he put it back on and stepped closer. "So we found you, boy. Can I sit?" "Yes, Daddy, we do mind," Sandy said, keeping a polite smile. His face turned serious and the smile slipped away. He stood up straighter, trying to take charge. "I just want to know that you're okay," he said. "We're fine, Daddy," Sandy said firmly. "Got it? We're living here now, and we want nothing to do with you. Nothing at all." "Who do you—" "Let's go, Mark," she said, getting up from the bar stool and taking my hand. I followed her towards the door. Halfway there, she stopped and turned back. "And let's be clear, Dad," she said, emphasizing his title. "You leave us alone and make sure everyone else does, too. If the press comes to our door, I'm going to tell them everything. You can explain to the voters how you misled them using your own daughter." His face showed anger, and he clenched his fists. "Say you understand," she said through tight lips. He just stared at her. "Say it," she urged. "I understand." With that, she turned again and led me out the door. She came back to my small apartment with me. Before Sandy arrived, I had been okay with the place. It met my needs. But now I felt a little embarrassed. Rebecca had been right. It felt more like a dorm room than a home. "I'm so hungry," Sandy said as she took off her jackets and scarves, shaking out her hair. "Do you have anything to eat?" "Sandwich?" I suggested. She raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" "Yep." "Is that all you've been eating the last 2 months?" "Yep." She began to smile. "What kind of sandwich?" I opened the freezer. "It's Thursday, so it's Tex-Mex sloppy joes with ground bison." "Bison? Like buffalo meat?" "Exactly." "Is it any good?" "I don't know. I haven't tried it yet." She closed the distance between us and gave me a warm hug. "You've already changed, Mark, and I think it's for the better." "How have I changed?" "I'm not sure." "You just have. So, are you ready for some sloppy joes?" "Sure." She helped me warm up the filling. 20 minutes later, we sat across from each other at the small table, our eyes locked as we ate, but we struggled to find words. After I finished and set my plate down, I gently touched the back of Sandy's hand. Her eyes filled with tears. I wiped a tear from her cheek and asked, "What's wrong?" "I thought I had lost you. For 2 months I was scared I would never see you again. When I finally found you, it was so much." "I'm sorry," I said. "It's not your fault," she replied. "It's mine. Mostly theirs." She took my hand and placed it softly against her cheek. "If this happens again, if things don't go well and you decide to move on, please tell me directly, okay?" "It's going to be okay, Sandy," I promised, meaning what I said. "But if it doesn't work out, promise me you won't just leave." "I promise." She smiled and leaned into my hand. "Thanks." A few moments later, we both felt more at ease. I was at the sink washing the dishes while Sandy dried and put them away. She became playful, splashing water on my shirt until I did the same to her, maybe a bit too much. "I'm all wet," she said, looking at her damp blouse. "Serves you right." "Fine," she said, a smile creeping onto her face as mischief sparkled in her eyes. "Might as well enjoy this now." She started to unbutton her blouse, but I pretended not to notice. "What are you doing?" "You know what I'm doing." I shook my head with a smile. "Not a clue. We need to finish the dishes." "This can wait," she said, stepping a bit closer. "Unless you're too busy with the dishes, let's take a break." I leaned in for a soft kiss, feeling happy to be close to her. Her slender figure felt familiar and our connection was clear. "Wait," I said, pulling back a little. "What's wrong?" she asked, looking puzzled. I grinned. "I want to see you enjoy this moment." "Right here?" she replied, glancing toward the window. "You started it," I said playfully. "Is this part of that adventurous spirit I've heard about?" she asked, intrigued. "Maybe." We shared a light laugh, and the mood turned playful and cheerful. "Are you going to join me?" she challenged with a grin. "Help you with what?" "Let's make this a fun moment." I laughed, enjoying the spontaneity. "Like this?" She kept the playful spirit alive, encouraging a light-hearted moment between us. She stepped out of her clothes with confidence, moving smoothly. I admired her, feeling a warm bond between us. "Now it's your turn," she said softly, and I followed her example, taking off the rest of my clothes. As I got closer, I wrapped my arms around her and we shared a gentle kiss. One hand held her close while the other lightly touched her arm. "This feels nice," she whispered, her voice warm and inviting as we enjoyed this moment. With a gentle gesture, she led me to the floor, where we found comfort in each other's presence. Our connection deepened as we hugged each other tightly. In that quiet moment, we both felt how strong our bond was. The outside world faded away, leaving just the two of us, connected in a way that words could not express fully. Later, as we lay together, our breathing calming down, smiles came easily. "You've really worked up an appetite, haven't you?" I said teasingly. She smiled back, love shining in her eyes. "Like I said, I'm just really excited. Are you going to keep this up?" I joked. "Maybe," she replied with a thoughtful smile as she snuggled closer to me. Noticing her change in mood, I asked, "What's on your mind?" She sighed softly, then said, "It still feels unreal, you know?" "Why's that?" "I was so scared. For weeks I thought I would never see you again. When my mom told me you didn't even know, I thought you would just forget about me." "And does this feel more real to you?" "It does," she said, cuddling into me. "It's not just about the fun, though that's nice. It's about this, Mark. Just you holding me. It felt real waking up with you, but I want to feel this way when I go to sleep too." "Are you asking if you can stay over? Is that too much too soon?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "I think I need this part too." She smiled happily and cuddled closer. Within moments, she was peacefully falling asleep, her breath softly touching my chest. The next morning, she woke me up like she used to on Sundays, and I'd recommend it to anyone for a good start to the day. Friday dinner was all about catching Sandy up on everything. I told her about Clarice Talbot, my brother's troubling actions, and my nephew I never knew about. She was surprised, but not completely shocked by Stevie's role in it. "I'm sorry, Mark," she said. "I know he's your brother, but he's always had a mean side. I thought that made him strong, but it didn't. Sometimes he was just cruel." "But you cared about him," I pointed out. She shook her head. "I loved the idea of him, of who he could be." On a sunny afternoon, we talked about what it would have been like to be like the prom king and queen, living in a nice house and having great kids. But later, I understood he would have been just like the other tough partners. I might have had the house and the kids, but I would not have had a real friend by my side. "You think I'm your soulmate?" I asked, a bit surprised. "Of course I do," she said, looking at me funny. "Don't you think of me that way?" "No," I replied. "I see you as the balance to my life. You complete me in ways that are important." "How is that different?" "I think it is." She thought for a moment. Then I shared how my music gigs had led me to meet Teddy and Nick to help with my songs. At first, she didn't show much interest because she didn't know who they were. "They wrote the music for Leadfoot," I explained. Suddenly, it clicked for her. "And now they're in General Beauregard?" "Exactly." "Wow," she said. "That sounds important." "Right?" I said, feeling happy. "They're going to help me share my songs with others." She paused, then asked, "Is this what you want to do now? Be a songwriter?" "Just part-time. I'm also thinking about becoming a law professor full-time." "A professor?" she said, laughing. "So now you'll have fans and students too?" I chuckled. "You can never have too many fans." "And what if I dress up for class, Professor?" She moved closer with a playful smile. "And maybe be a little naughty in class?" "You cheeky girl," I laughed gently and gave her a light tap. "Hey, is that a good hey or a bad hey?" "Just a fun hey," she said, looking back at me with sparkling eyes. That led to a fun time of exploring new moments together. Later, she asked me to put on some lotion, and it turned out to be just as nice as what we had done before. On Sunday at noon, Sandy and I sat under one umbrella with Clarice Talbot, all of us trying to stay warm as the cold rain fell on us. We joked and shivered about the strange weather so far north. I might not have noticed him if someone hadn't stood up and left near the end of the first quarter. He was alone, without an umbrella, his baseball cap wet as he tried to stay warm. Even from where we were, I could see he looked very deep in thought as he watched his grandson play in the muddy field. I nudged Sandy to look. Her face was hard to read. Clarice turned, looked carefully, and said softly, "It was never his fault. None of it was." I stayed quiet, but Sandy didn't. If he really cared, he would have done something. "But she's his wife," Clarice replied. "If you can't trust your partner, who can you trust?" Sandy glanced at me, then looked down. I took her cold hand in mine and held it gently, hoping to warm her up a bit. "You're right," I said to Clarice. "It's hard to believe good things can come from someone you've shared so much with for many years." "But he could have been there for you," Sandy quietly said after a moment. "He could have made more effort, tried to be part of Skylar's life." Clarice sighed. "Yeah, maybe, but I'm not sure I would have let him." "Why now, then?" "Because time has passed. Now he's trying to do better. It's not just about the money, though that helps. It's not his duty, either. I think he felt ashamed. He always thought it was his fault for what happened before." Clarice turned to me. "I don't know what he did to you, but it was more than just this. Still, I don't think he's fully to blame. You might want to think about that." I stayed still, just looking at him, lost in his thoughts. The General scored a touchdown late in the game. Not Skylar, but the quarterback. Skylar made an important block right before the goal line, and they held on to win 6-0. After the game, he ran up to us, giving his mom a big hug that got her raincoat muddy. "We did it!" he shouted, full of energy after a tough game. "Undefeated, Mom! Do you know what this means?" "No, dear," she said, fixing his hair with her fingers. "What does it mean?" "I get a trophy," he said, his smile showing off his missing baby teeth. Then he turned to us. "Who are your parents?" Clarice knelt down beside him. "This is your Uncle Mark," she said, "and your Aunt Sandy." He looked confused. "I have an uncle and an aunt?" I noticed my dad standing nearby, looking sad as he shifted from foot to foot. I cleared my throat, and when Clarice noticed, I nodded towards my dad. She glanced over and gave a small, sad smile. "And a grandpa, too." "A grandpa?" "He's over there, sweetie." Skylar turned to look, unsure what to think. After a moment of staring, he asked quietly, "Are you my grandpa?" Dad paused, then nodded. Skylar walked over to Dad, stopped, and looked up. "Where have you been?" Dad cleared his throat, and I could see he was fighting back tears. His body tensed, and it seemed like he wanted to reach down and hug the little boy. After a moment, he said, "I guess I haven't been a very good grandpa, have I?" "No," the boy said. "You haven't." They looked at each other for a minute. Then, slowly, Skylar reached out his little hand and asked, "Can you buy me a hot chocolate before they run out?" Tears mixed with the rain on Dad's face as he replied, "Yeah, I'd love to." The little boy led him to the small snack stand by the end zone, which was already full of players. "He wants to be part of Skylar's life," Clarice said as she watched them. "We talked about it after you left, and I think it's good for Skylar." "And my mom?" I asked. She shook her head. "He didn't think that was wise." "He's right." We walked to the snack stand together, standing off to the side. "You have any plans for an early dinner?" Sandy asked Clarice. She shrugged. "Probably just soup and sandwiches. It's a chilly day like this." "You're in luck," Sandy said, brightening under the gray skies. "Do you think Skylar likes bacon and tomato on his grilled cheese?" I looked at Sandy and smiled. "But it's not grilled cheese night." "It is now," she said, then turned to Clarice. "Are you two in?" Dad declined Sandy's dinner invitation. "Thanks," he said, not able to meet my gaze. "I have a flight back to Washington. Some important things are coming up that I really need to handle." "Will we see you again soon?" Sandy asked. He looked up, surprised. "You still want to?" He turned to me, but I didn't soften my expression. His gaze dropped again. I let him think for a moment, then said, "I don't know, Dad. You hurt me." He nodded. "I understand, and I'm sorry. More sorry than you know." "But now you have a grandson here," I replied. "A grandson who shouldn't be left behind again." He glanced at Clarice and Skylar as they walked to her car. "Is it too late?" "Yeah, it feels too late. But better late than never, right?" he asked. "But your mother," he said, still looking at Skylar with a longing I hadn't seen in a long time. "It seems you have some choices," I said. He turned back to me, searching for a hint of forgiveness. I didn't give him any. After a moment, he took a slow nod. I took Sandy's hand and left him there in the rain. 9 months later, I was waiting at the front door of our little home, just a couple of blocks from my nephew's house. "Hurry up," I called out. "I'm going to miss my train." "Found it," Sandy called from down the hall. "Slow down, you might trip." She came to a stop at the end of the hall, smiled widely, and raised the camera to take a picture. "Look at you. You look great." "You think?" I said, adjusting my jacket. "My own professor," she said, putting the camera down to come over and fix my tie. "This is amazing." "You think?" I asked. "I think." "Well, I think this is even better," I said, placing my hand gently on her belly. "Even better?" she said, as her hand covered mine and pressed against our growing baby. "Is that even a word?" "It should be." She smiled brightly and gave me a warm look. "Do your best, Professor. The end." Hey, listeners. If you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.